So let me just get started by saying we're talking about strategic planning today, one of the most important things that you'll do in chapter leadership. And I want this to be a highly participatory discussion today. So you'll notice I'm going to stop at various points and say, okay, it's engagement time. And what do you think you're going to do when I say that? Anyone?
Get engaged.
Exactly. Thank you. So that's the thing. And Jenny, you might have to flip back and forth between sharing and engagement so that we can see each other. So I'll ask questions, you'll answer. You'll share experience and knowledge with each other. So there'll be different kinds of ways you can do that. So this is going to be a conversation. You're going to gain knowledge. You're going to share experiences. It's going to be all of those things rolled into one. So let's get started. Jenny. This is why I like to run my own slides. Sorry. Okay. So first, I want to make sure we all have the same context or framework on strategic planning. So how would you describe a strategic plan? Just shout out your response. Jenny, can you unmute everybody if they're muted? How would you describe your response? Or raise your hand so Jenny can put you in the spotlight. I can't see anybody now, Jenny.
A roadmap.
It's a roadmap. There you go. I'm in this weird view. What other words would you use to describe?
A mission statement.
Mission statements are part of that. That's true. So
for me, it's sort of a high level focus, very, very focused goal for the chapter.
So plan for the future.
Mm-hmm. Plan for growth. Anyone else? Oh, so I would say that a strategic plan is your guide to ensure consistency year over year within the organization as leadership changes. That's one thing. It keeps the organization moving in a consistent direction.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a tool, a resource, and a vision for the future. And some of you use some of those words in there, so that's great. So that's the guide we're going to go with today. The definition I would say is that it's a tool or a resource to guide your organization into the future. And I think, Patty, you might have said something close to that. So when do you do strategic planning? How often? And what is the timing of the year? So early in my career, and some of you probably are right there with me back in the day, and I want to admit this was the 80s. I've been doing strategic planning literally since I was 24 years old, and I was executive director of a foundation. And so I learned a lot over the years and had the opportunity to actually teach strategic planning at the Northern Virginia Community College many years ago. And so early in my career, we created 5-year plans. Now, we know there's no way you could have a 5-year plan now. So when we talk about when we do a plan, I think that things change so quickly now. We do a 3-year plan. Now, we have a 10-year vision, if you will, but our plan literally is 3 years long, and we do an annual validation process where we're relooking at our goals and objectives to determine, has anything significant happened in the environment that we need to, or in our world, commercial real estate, in the association, that we need to take into consideration. So I say that this is my guidance, is a 3-year plan, an annual validation with kind of an environmental scan of what's changed, if there has been significant change. And I think the other thing that is important is that it's consistent. You have a consistent direction for those 3 years. So the intent of the annual review isn't to make change. It's just to recheck. Is this still where we're going based on everything that's happening, and the decisions we made are still in place? You don't want to change it year over year, if at all possible. And that goes to the final question or context. So now we have it's a tool or a resource to guide an organization into the future. We're going to do it a 3-year plan with an annual validation with the leadership, and then why would you do it? Why a strategic plan? Oh, you know what? I wanted you to do a chat storm with this. I can see chat, so that's actually good. Let's do a chat storm. Here, put 1 or 2 words in the chat box. Why would we do a strategic plan? Ready, set, go. Clarity, direction, focus, growth, focused efforts, keeps goals clear and concise, keeps us on target, define and measure, planning, measurable progress. It's like GPS. You have to set the ultimate destination so you drive on the right path to get there. Purpose. New members know what they're joining. Sets accountability. Yeah, those are all terrific, terrific, terrific. Communicate a consistent message to members. Accountability. Transparency. Yes, yes, yes. I hadn't thought of the T word. Yep. And stay competitive. Yeah, those are all good words. Those are all correct. They're all correct and they're true. One of the things that you didn't mention that is really, really important, it's more on the internal side than the external side, is that a strategic plan keeps the organization going in a consistent direction year over year. And what I mean by that, think about, in our organizations, you get new leadership every year. So every year, if you didn't have a plan that said, here's where we're going, and you didn't have the commitment of the leadership to go there, every year a new president could come on and say, oh, it's my year, let's do this. Or, oh, it's my year, I want to leave this legacy. And then what happens to the organization? It's chaos, and you get nowhere, because every year you're changing direction. So the fundamental reason you really want a strategic plan in our type of organizations, particularly, but truly in any corporation, you don't see your company going in different directions every other year. Now, I know 2020 was the exception that everybody put their strategic plans on hold to really address, but that is really the fundamental for you as leaders in your chapters or future leaders, whatever your role is that you want to know that there's a plan that you're going to be following for 3 years to move the organization forward. And every year it's your responsibility as a leader to get others to embrace and buy into that strategic plan and make sure that it continues to keep the organization on a consistent track. So that's my first part there. And I'll pause there. Any questions or any perspectives on the chapter, on the what, why, and when of strategic planning? We're all good. It helps with leadership recruiting too, if folks see established direction. Absolutely. We're going to talk more about that too in an ongoing process. Jenny, you can bring that back up. So the next part is what I always call first things first, right? When you're doing strategic planning. And I had the benefit to interface with some chapters this year that were doing strategic planning. I'm going to just change my view real quick. And so one of the big important things that I would tell you is that before you begin a strategic planning process, you need to gather information. What type of information do you think that you would need to gather? And this is an engagement opportunity, so just shout it out. What type of information would you need to gather before you start a strategic plan?
SWOT analysis.
SWOT, great. Yep, SWOTs are great. I love a good SWOT. I'm not going to lie.
Financial information.
Financial. What is the financial state of the organization? That helps you look at
membership information.
Membership data. Mm-hmm. So here are some that I have written down, or these are questions that you as leaders should ask yourselves as you begin, or before you even begin planning. What do you think you know about your members and your audience? Yeah, haves or wants. Lindsay, that's exactly what I was getting to is, what do you think that your members and your overall audience wants or needs from the organization? And the thing is about that is you may think but until you do some kind of survey, you may not really know. It may surprise you what you find out. Then the other part of knowledge or information or research you want to do is what do you know about what's happening in the industry in your market that will impact what the chapter is doing? Not just looking at this moment, but looking at what you can see going into the future. And you have to make some leaps of faith there, and based on what's happened in the environment over the last 3 years, where are things going in your city, all of those kinds of components. But you do need to take a look at that local market and what assumptions are you making? What assumptions are you making about where you are in terms of growth and development, where you want to be? And so capturing some of that, maybe you want to conduct a member survey, as I mentioned. The other piece of it is other stakeholders, right? If you want to attract non-members to your chapter, then you better be asking non-members why they're not a member, or what they need or want, or what's important to them. And it can be a simple 5-question survey, but you need to gather some of that information. And then the other thing is, do you need to hold a focus group? Would it be helpful in addition to surveying? And there's a number of ways to do that, collect that kind of information. So before you even get started in a process, you have to put the research piece in there. And then the other part of that is the very first thing you need to do once you determine it is now a good time to undertake your strategic plan is you need to develop a work plan. And what I mean by that is that you can't do a strategic plan if you haven't laid out the timeline of how things are going to be done and each task. So what I love, I have a little format I use called my work plan format, which the staff is getting very familiar at. But I look at when do we want this to be done? And I have this later, but I'll tell you now, I typically think that most organizations should plan in advance of budgeting in their the third year. In the third year of your plan, you want to be developing the new plan in advance of the subsequent year's budget. And so let's just say we do our budget here at Crew Network in April-May timeframe. So I would want to have the strategic plan done no later than, say, March 1st, so that we have time to go through it and assess what are the goals and objectives in there, and what are the tactics we're going to need to fund in the subsequent year to support it. So think about that timing. So if I use that as my date, March 1, then I'm going to work backward and create a work plan that lists every task that's going to happen between that moment in 2020 and March 1st, 2021. And I'm going to put down, it would be in chronological order, moving forward, not backward, but I work backward, but chronological order. And I like my chart has the date on the left-hand column, the task, and then who's going to be responsible, and a section where you can put notes in, so that if you're leading the strategic plan, you can check off and write notes about the status of each task as you're moving along in the process. So I highly recommend creating a work plan that drives, that everyone can buy into before you even begin the process of research or any other steps in the plan. So I had a former board chair. I really liked him. He was from Georgia. He was a good old boy, but he actually had a degree from Harvard. And he would always say, Wendy, you need to plan the work and work the plan. And so I think that that's a really one of the things that I live by in my work life is plan the work the plan. And so when you do your work plan, then you can begin to execute the tasks. So go ahead, Jen. So I want to just mention this to all of you too. And I know, many of you probably have been through a strategic planning process at some point in your career, either at work or in Crew or another organization. The strategic planning process is basically the same for any plan you're doing. There are certain steps that are consistent no matter when you're doing it, what you're doing and so it's not any kind of there's no ahas in it. They're simple tasks, and we're going to talk about that. But what I wanted to do was, do you guys like doing a chat storm, or would you like to shout out? Because I think the chat storm was maybe a little bit more engaging. And LaShawn, thank you. LaShawn put something in the chat that I am going to call out. When you're doing a strategic plan, make sure that everyone involved knows and understands the governance framework of the organization or the chapter. And that's really important because you're going to be planning a future or have a future vision. And you need to understand how the governance lends itself to the goals and objectives and works within that. And we can talk more about that. And I may ask LaShawn to do that because I know Tampa Bay just recently went through a strategic planning process. But here's our engagement. Here's the chat that I want you to do, chat storm of. What do you think are the first steps in the strategic planning process that need to happen? What would you do first? First, second, third? What are some things that you need to do? Besides create a work plan, know your goals. Do you know your goals first, though? That's a question I have. I'd survey first. Karen, yes. Thank you. Engage the team. Yep. Yep. What else? Anybody else? What are some other things that you would do? Understand the expected outcome? Absolutely. Yep. Who will be working the plan? And Tiba, I think what you're saying is not necessarily who's creating the plan, but who's going to execute to ensure that the plan happens or the chapter moves forward in its goals. Read through previous strategic plans. That's a great one, Nathan. I hadn't thought about that, but that's actually a really good one. Kathy Fahey, create a survey, create committee to start plan. Maybe even read other chapters plans. That's a really good suggestion, Nathan, that I did not have on my list or as a resource. I know that there are some great chapter strategic plans out there. And then connect with prior leadership. Define a clear vision of the future so you have consensus on where you want to go. Seek to understand why prior strategies have not worked or been executed. I think that's a really good thing. But you don't want to spend too much time looking back and more time looking forward. Sometimes you can get caught up in, you tried this and it didn't work and dissect it so much that it eats up a lot of time and it crushes some creativity too, I'll be honest. And thank you, Marilyn. I agree with Nathan. Note that once read, you should honestly evaluate what is working and what is not and show the gap. So yeah. Where would we find other chapter plans in their website? Jenny, that's a question that you can answer. Or does someone here on the phone want to let this person know? Do we keep any in Crew Biz under the resource library? I think there are some there, aren't there, Jenny?
There may be, if chapters have submitted them. You can also share them on the President's Community if you want to do that there, but we can absolutely put them in the Crew Biz Resource Center if anybody's willing to share.
If you Google Crew plus Strategic Plan, you'll find a bunch of chapters. We found a bunch of cool ones. Thanks, Nathan. So let's go to the next slide. We're going to now dig into some of these planning steps. Understand the current state, basic data on membership, sponsorship, participation. Yeah, Kathy, that's a great point because you want everyone who's going to sit down to start brainstorming the plan to have the same data points, right? You want to make sure you all have the benefit of that. So some of you said some of these, so we'll go through them. Planning group. Who will serve on the planning group? Should it be a committee or should it be a task force or should it be a work group? You can call it whatever you want, but typically a strategic plan group is task oriented, right? So it wouldn't be a standing committee. You would appoint a task force or a work group temporarily to work through the plan. Now, I'd be curious about this too. Would you include the executive committee of the board, the entire board? Would it just be the leadership? Would you invite committee chairs for that given year? Would you invite some rank and file members? Who would you invite to do a strategic plan? I'm going to tell you. I think it's really great to mix it up so that you have a strategic planning. Yeah, that's right, Marilyn. You need to mix it up so that you have a variety of perspectives at the table. And of course, a strategic plan will always be approved by the entire board and reviewed and approved. I think that getting some outside perspectives outside of the board, it's really, really helpful. And so I see some people putting in, who have you had in the past? Has it been rank and file members, committee chairs, board leaders, anybody? That is something I wish we'd done. Yeah. So I just think it brings a different perspectives and, creates better insights. and different perspectives. So I've been on ones where we've just been the board and executive committee. I've been on ones where it's been the executive committee and the staff. It depends on the size of the board sometimes, but it also just depends on the culture of the organization. And so culturally, if you really want your chapter to be inclusive, I think including people outside of the leadership is really, really important. So, and by leadership, I mean the board, but it's also the committee chairs are part of leadership. So you should have board members, you should have executive committee members, you should have committee chairs, but you should also open it up to those other, I call them rank and file members. They may be people that are less engaged, and think what they would bring to the table. And this might be something that you tap someone who says, yeah, I never volunteered for anything, but this is something they could really get into. So I would look at that. And thanks, past presidents. Do you limit the number of participants? I would say absolutely. And here's the thing is, the more people you have, the harder, more cooks in the kitchen, the harder it is to not burn the food. I don't know if that's actually the saying, I'll be honest. But I do think that having more than 12 people, or I would say 12 or 15 people, you will get mired in so much group, so I think you do need to have some limitations around that. If you look at your board and you know that there, and I don't want to create any kind of internal story, but if you want to have, you should have whoever the executive committee is, because they're the ones that are going to be shepherding, right? And maybe you have the president and the president-elect, and then you pick 2 board members who are in their first year of service, and that will be part of the strategic plan launch in the next year, so that you have the people that are going to be moving forward in leadership. And then you pick maybe 2 or 3 committee chairs who are going to be continuing on into the next year, so that you have that consistency of people who've experienced the process of planning or developing the strategic plan. And then maybe you find a couple rank and file members. Now, it's totally up to you. If you want to have more board members and less of the other, that's up to you. But I think that mixing it up and keeping it to 12 or so is probably a good idea. Actually, I know it is. I don't think so. So let's go to, once we formed the task force, then we do the research piece. And a lot of you mentioned that in the comments. Research is very important, getting that context, that framework, and the data points. There are so many ways you can collect information, and I love all of them. I am an information junkie. I think the more data I have and insights I have, the more knowledge I have. And I think that can only be helpful to me in wherever I go and whatever I do. So I love, and it's not just data, it's just information. And so you have the member survey, right? You can survey the members. You should survey the non-members or survey your sponsors. Don't you want to know? Go ahead. I'm sorry, Lindsay, did you want to say something? Okay, maybe not. You may would want to survey the sponsors, right? And maybe it's 3 different small surveys. Maybe that's just 5 questions, but I think you need to get an idea. I mean, the goal of your research is to understand what your members want and need from your chapter. And asking them how you should design the website is not an effective use of their time, nor what you need for them to develop a strategic plan. You need to understand what they need from the organization to help them move forward. And Stephanie just put in a note. We did this as well at Crew. We surveyed, Stephanie Duncan, Crew DC, said that they surveyed former members to understand, former members in the past to understand why they left the organization. That's a great data point that you would be very valued. That's when you can figure out, maybe we need to do more of this because this is why people were leaving. And Barbara Champeau also just completed a survey. So if you're looking for survey questions, check with your colleagues at other associations and other chapters, and you can develop something that's really going to work for you. The other things, I really love focus groups. I like getting together a group of 6 or 8 people and posing some specific questions and getting feedback. Now, the thing is about all of these points of research is you can't take one in a vacuum. You have to look at the survey data. You have to look at the focus group input. You may do some personal calls. You have to look at all of those inputs. The biggest one that I really like that people don't do very often, and maybe you know about this, but environmental scanning. Does anybody know what environmental scanning is? Jenny, do you want to put that definition in the chat box for us? environmental scanning I love because it's a process where you're looking both internally within the organization as well as externally in the environment. And you're looking at what's happening in society, what's happening in commercial real estate, maybe what's happening in a specific asset class. Are there significant changes in politics in your community? Those are kind of external things that will definitely impact the people you serve in your membership. So you want to kind of take a look at those. So, and you see in the definition, then you look internally and you go do a little scan internally. So this is not a data point in terms of a number, but it's doing a scan of and making observations about programming or feedback that you've gotten. There's different aspects of the work that you do. Like, for example, maybe you want to do a little environmental scanning and ask some new members what their experience was for the first 6 or 9 months as a member. That's an environmental scan to understand how you're doing with inclusion and welcoming people in. Those are really important anecdotal kinds of things to have the committee have in hand. You know, I would just, this is an engagement opportunity as well. Shout out or chat. What are some things that your chapter has done? Karen says, Cape Fear is a small chapter and our board was able to call every person who hadn't re-upped and got feedback and some renewals, but got lots of great insights. So if there are other things that you've done in environmental scanning, and Jenny, can you put up that other link I gave you? Jenny's going to put a link in the box that is there's a model for environmental scanning that you may want to use. It just explains what the process is and how you can go about it. Anyway, I don't know if you've ever done it before. If you haven't, it's a worthwhile effort. So if you want to just chat up right now.
Wendy,
yeah.
Lindsay has raised her hand. I don't know if she wants.
You know what? I can't see anything in here. I don't know what's going on. I'm just having a really hard day with crew. So go ahead, call on Lindsay.
Lindsay Minji, do you want to?
Hi. And then I'm sorry, I don't know if my camera is facing forward or backwards.
Backwards.
Okay. All right. Flipping it.
There you go.
Okay. I had a question. When you're conducting your surveys and your focus groups, do you look for trends? Because I know my default, and this is a weakness, is I tend to like latch on to those ideas that are similar to my own. And then, you know, kind of champion those, but that obviously then fails to recognize the wants and needs of others who are different than me. Like that's a big thing I learned in 2020 is like, Lindsay, not everybody thinks the same as you. But so how do you balance that with trying to be everything to everyone and and champion every idea that everyone has? Like, how do you find a balance between the two?
You shouldn't be championing anyone's ideas or suggestions. You should be looking at what's best for the chapter overall and advocating for that. So putting your personal feelings aside of what you like or what's a great idea or a good goal is, and I think this is a really, really good leadership skill to have, is to take yourself out of it and to say, based on all this data and information, these are the right, you know, I can say these, that I think these are I can get behind these, or we as an organization need to get behind these to make a difference for our chapters and create value and make a compelling reason why they would stay with the organization.
Right. Yeah. So I'm hearing you then say, that there is value in looking for trends, meaning, you know, if I'm doing different focus groups, or if survey results come back from a different, from a non-renewing member, and then the same information comes back from an existing member, then that's kind of like something to pay attention to. Versus, I guess, you know, if everyone who left my organization said, oh, well, we left your organization because of XYZ, but if XYZ isn't where the chapter isn't what's best for the chapter, do you change direction to get those people back? Or do you say, no, like we're agreeing as a chapter, we're continuing to move in a direction away from that?
Yeah. So you said a lot of stuff there, but I'm going to start from the beginning. So the first thing that you said was about trends. And so here's the thing about data and information. You're looking at a whole scope of stuff. and you are looking, and I'll tell you a little secret, and most of you know me. We do a lot of evaluation here. But if I see in a response evaluating something that one person says it, I go, okay. If I see two people say it, I'm like, oh, maybe. But if I see 4 or 5 people are saying something, then I think that you need to pay attention to that. The more people that are saying something, the more important it becomes to the chapter.
Sure.
The less people. So you are looking for that. Are you hearing the same thing over and over? That's something that you pay attention to. So yes, the answer to that is yes. I forget what the rest of it was, but I think you were saying if someone left your company and you were hearing over and over the same reason why, then yes, you would adjust your direction to take that into consideration. And so you would put that in the plan. And I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head. So let's just say, and I know some chapters experience this, when, you're doing 107 programs in a year, and you get feedback from multiple members that say there's too many choices, there's too much, I can't do it all. Then would you scale back the number of programs? You would definitely do an assessment and see what were the best attended, and the evaluations were the highest scores on content, and focus on doing those kinds of things versus maybe some ancillary things that didn't do as well in the evaluation. So yes, I think that's very important. And that's why I'm saying you can't take any piece of research in isolation, but look at it overall and see where you're seeing either trends or multiple responses, and whittle that down. And that might be part of a task that you have as a task force or the committee that's doing it, is to funnel the information into a summary. Here are things we're seeing over and over. And that might be preliminary work, which we're going to get to, about this. And so that's actually my next part, is that data review. So Lindsay, you're good now?
Yes, thank you so much.
And any other questions? I was gonna pause at the end of the slide, but I'm happy to stop now. Okay.
Barbara has a question. Do you want to ask it now or at the end of the slide, Barbara?
I'll wait till the end of the slide. Thanks, Jenny.
Okay.
Yeah, let me get through the planning steps, and then we'll go back one by one and talk about any of them that you want to dig deeper into. The second one, this next one is data review, and this gets to what Lindsay was saying, is that each person has to have the same information, and they have to go through it so that you're all starting from the same place. Now, you may want to say, okay, we're all going to read it, and we want you to put in the top 10 things that you see that have come up over that we need to take into consideration. Or you say the top 10 things that we see, and the 4 most important environmental scanning points, so that you're narrowing it down before you even get to the meeting. Now, that could all change when you get there, but at least you've had a summary document where everyone's had a chance to have input, and you give that to people a week or 2 in advance so they can go through that and process it and think about it, and then bring their feedback to the table. So the data review, if you're doing the research, do the data review, create a summary, ask people what they're seeing as important, and then you start working that through in the planning session. So I'm gonna jump to the planning session. You have, when you're doing a strategic planning session, there are a lot of components, which we'll talk a little bit more about, but it's all about the flow. And will you have pre-work to do? Will you have reading to do? Will you have, one of the things we do sometimes before we do training is we have to watch a video. So are there videos that you want people to watch that give information? Is there reading material? All of those pieces. And then, you're thinking about, when you're planning the session, the day and the time, how many days. I mean, that's a really important element. All of those things, the logistics. Don't underestimate the importance of the logistics of a planning session. And how, I guess this is an engagement. How long, just put a number in the chat. How long do you think a really good strategic planning session needs to be? Is it a day? Is it a half day? Is it 2 days? Put in what you think. Chat storm that. 2 days. I have 2 days. Half day to a full day. 2 half days. 3 days with a few sessions spread out. Full day with a break. I think, LaShawn, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Tampa Bay, didn't you do 2 full days, but in 2 separate weeks or something like that?
Correct. We broke ours up within 1 week period to really give people an opportunity to digest what we had talked about and really come back with good intel for the second session.
That's another option for folks. And I like that idea of digesting. Again, you're asking a lot of people to think about a lot of things, and you want that deep thinking. That is going to be the benefit to you. So I think 2.5 days. So from my standpoint, the number of days you should do strategic planning depends. That's my answer. I actually think 2 days is a really good amount of time if you want to do a thorough job. It usually takes a minimum of 2 days. If you're doing the annual validation, that could be a couple hours. It may even only be an hour at the board meeting, but I do think planning takes a little bit of time. Tactics. Include in your work plan the time it takes to do the tactics. You know, the strategic planning, and I want to save some of this. You know, you want to include the right people in the process for the tactics. And the planning committee should be focused on the vision, mission, goals, and objectives. Those are all the high-level things. Committee leadership should be engaged, or maybe committee leadership and members engaged in the tactics that you develop to reach the goals. And who knows why? I guess I should ask you guys, why would you engage the committee members and or leaders, committee chapter leaders on tactics? You want me to just tell you why?
They're the ones that are going to execute.
Yes, Stephanie Duncan, thank you. It's buy-in, it's commitment, and it's engagement. They are the executors. And so you want them, number one, to understand what the goal is and the objective and give them that guidance. So maybe you want, we'll talk about that, but yeah, they're the ones doing the heavy lifting. So thank you. So I'll pause here. Any aspect, I'm sorry, I didn't get to communication. I just want to say communication is often the last thing people think about when strategic planning, but it is imperative, and we'll do a deeper dive on it at the end, but don't underestimate the importance of the communication and put it in your work plan because it is part of strategic planning. Okay, questions?
Hi, it's Barbara Champeau. So somebody mentioned early on the word accountability, and I'm wondering when and how you build accountability into the strategic plan. And secondly, I think accountability from a volunteer organization looks a little bit different than from an organization which employs people. So if anybody has any suggestions, Wendy, you or others, on how you implement or instill accountability.
Barbara, that's a fantastic question, and I'm sort of ashamed to say that I didn't build that into this planning steps. It is, a part of what you need to do. So, back in the day when I first started doing strategic planning and in my career, we would do a plan and I'd put it on the shelf, and no one would ask about it. It was a terrible, terrible thing. And so what we do here, I can tell you what we do here at Crew, but we have paid staff. But I think there's an approach you can use off of this. So when we get our final strategic plan, the board and executive committee develop a plan with the goals and objectives, and then staff actually does the tactics. And what I do in the post planning is that everyone who's involved in on the board. So let's just say, Barbara, that the committees are doing execution, right, of tactics that support the objectives. And the board, there's a board liaison for each of those committees, right? The board liaison, their role is really to make sure that what the committees are doing is moving the objective forward. They're meeting the goals. And if they're going off in a wrong direction, the board liaison should pull them back. That's why I like that model for governance, is that there's the board, and then you have your chapters, and a board liaison participates or attends each of those meetings to monitor. And so the board liaison in real time can give that wisdom and guidance. But the other thing is that at a board meeting quarterly or biannually, the board should sit down and take out the plan. And the format of your plan should have a column where you go through and you check the status of each tactic under each objective. And so what we do at Crew Network, and so I think that's a board exercise, Barbara, honestly, and I would do it a minimum of twice a year, because what I always say, we do it here, I do it in June and December every year. I give the board a copy of the strategic plan with a list of all the tactics we've completed in support of the objectives and goals. And what that does for them is they can see actually what's being executed and how it's supporting the plan. In a chapter environment where it's volunteers, I think there has to be accountability, but you also have to remember they're volunteers. And so you can't fire them. And trust me, you don't want to. But that is the accountability. I feel really strongly that the board needs to know what we're doing and how it's supporting, and that how it's supporting advancing is really important. And LaShawn saying the strategic goals are at the top of the board agenda at every meeting and they're discussed. So I think that if you look at that board liaison role as a conduit to ensure that committees stay on track with the goals, and that the board then does a review, then each board liaison should come to that quarterly review or biannual review with their update, right? They should be able to say, here are the 5 things that the committee that I liaison with has completed or achieved. So that gives you accountability. And the thing is you know what? Sometimes they won't get done everything that they want to get done. And you have to be okay with that because you're not going to change the world. I will tell you what I learned recently and probably in the last 5 to 7 years in strategic planning is that historically, I think we've tried to do too much in 3 years. You have to be reasonable about what you can truly accomplish and what's important in this moment or in the next 2 years versus trying to put everything in, the plan all at once. So this year, I think our plan is we have a 1-page mission, vision, goals, and our whole plan is maybe it's 4 goals and maybe 3 objectives under each, and that keeps it really concise and focused. And what the staff did is once the staff put all the tactics in, we went to each tactic and put in what year we were going to do it, so that we weren't overwhelmed either. That we knew we didn't have to worry about XYZ. We put that was a third year of the plan goal. So track it that way as well, so that committees know, look, we want you to achieve this objective, but we know that's going to take more time than year 1 or 2. So let's put that in year 3. So I think that's an important piece too. Any other suggestions for from other chapters? This is the knowledge sharing part. Any other suggestions for how you have accountability on the strategic plan?
I think it's also an opportunity. It's how you frame if an objective or a tactic isn't accomplished. I think to look at it as a learning lesson. So it's not that someone failed or didn't come through. It's let's look at why didn't this happen and maybe we need to pivot.
Mm-hmm. Good point, Alyssa. Thank you. Any other questions about or thoughts or anything you want to share about any of these planning steps that
Tuesday the 18th, right, Gal?
Jill, we can hear you. Any other points or thoughts that you want to share? Anybody who's done something in these that has been helpful? All right, then we'll go on. The next one is a question that I get a lot. Should we hire a consultant or not? What are your thoughts on this? Has anyone here used a consultant? Can you tell us about it? Did you use a consultant? How did it go? Was it worthwhile?
Can I speak to this, Wendy?
Yes, absolutely.
So for me, or for Crew Tampa Bay, I'll say, it was very important. And so before I begin, I think it's different whether you should hire somebody depending on the stage of where you're at with your strategy, right? So for Crew Tampa Bay, we were strategic planning to go from a working to strategic board. It's all new. Everything is different. I'm trying to sell something that's completely never been done before. So for that example, it was very important for me for this not to be LaShawn's vision and to have a third party help that with that messaging. And so I would say, absolutely, it was worth the money spent. And it was a crew member, as you know, Elka Laughlin out of Houston, who was fabulous. I highly recommend her. But if you're a, Crew Dallas, who's been on strategic planning for years and years, you've got a system, you may not need to hire a facilitator. Just my thought.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, you bring up a really great distinction, though, LaShawn, that I want to call out to all of the attendees here is LaShawn strategically she's leading the chapter through a transformation, not just a strategic plan. And that's a distinction that you have to pay attention to when you think about how to go about it, for sure. That is a bigger, holistic change for the organization. So I agree 100%. Has any chapter done strategic planning without a consultant that would like to share their experience? I really miss you guys. I'm just wishing someone would talk at me.
Listen, okay, this is me again. I'm going to stop talking, but we did a strategic plan before the transformation but nothing happened. So that was really the problem.
Okay. Well, that's another great shared experience. And Nathan noted in the chat that he hires consultants to do studies in his day job a lot, and he wonders if they're actually doing anything because it does take a lot of work to support their work. Here's the thing: when you're hiring as a volunteer, hiring a strategic planning consultant, though, is you give them all the data and information that you've collected, and you do the logistics, but they have got to plan the session. And all you should, so your goal when you're working with a consultant, this is kind of, I have this rule sometimes for internal meetings, don't tell the staff. My goal at the end of every meeting with my senior team is that I don't have any action items. I don't take any tasks on. That's what your goal should be as the leader. If you're leading strategic planning, is you want to walk away from the planning meeting with the consultant with little, if any, follow-up tasks to do. Now you'll have to provide them with the logistics, where you're having the meeting, that kind of stuff. And you'll have to provide them all the research you've done. And you will likely have to partner with them on research. But they should do all of they should create the experience and then share it with you, and then you can feedback on it and they do it. So I agree, you have to be careful. Yes, Patty. And we used a consultant a couple of years, and yeah. So that is the thing too, Jennifer, saying that well, let me get to the finish. Let me finish what I was going to say about this, and then I'm going to speak to your point, Jennifer Schumann. So my professional advice to you is to always use a consultant and/or a strategic planning facilitator, and you want them to not only prepare on the front end, lead and facilitate the session, but you want them to create the actual document. They have the broad overview, and that should be part of the contract with them, is that no one person in the volunteer ranks that's participating is writing the plan afterwards. The consultant should always do that. So why do I recommend this? It's best to have a trained professional because they ask deep questions. They'll probe in areas that may be sensitive that a volunteer cannot, and they will expand the scope of your thinking based on the broad experience they have working with other organizations. So there's that. It's always great to have an objective outsider involved in the conversation or facilitating the conversation. They don't have a stake in anything. So it gives them some leeway and latitude to help move the conversation forward. And a lot of times, and you all know this, you get in the weeds and you lose focus of what the goal is. So if you're going to put 2 hours in the morning to finalize the goals, and you get too far in the weeds and spending too much time, a facilitator or consultant pulls you out of that more quickly than you can imagine. And so I think that's an important role for them. And I think that last part is letting them go through the process, do all of the, the whiteboard and all of that, and let them take the notes and go home and create the draft plan for you. That's not to say you're all not going to take notes and kind of have an idea what the outcome is, but they should do that work for you. And I've always had the consultants do that part. And then to LaShawn's point, where can you find this person? We have a number of women who do strategic planning in Crew Network. And if you search in CrewBiz in the membership directory under strategic planning, you may find them there. If you look in the speakers directory, you may find them there. But I know there's some in at least one person I know in Florida, Texas, a couple in Texas actually. And then the other part of it is if you really want someone who is outside of commercial real estate or outside of our industry, and I'll talk about that. You can look in your local community. There are all kinds of consultants, and find someone who has an association background in your city might be a good person because they understand what a volunteer organization is, and that helps too sometimes. And And so here, this is the other fundamental question. Do you need someone who understands commercial real estate and crew or not? I think it could go either way. There's benefits and pros and cons to both. And I see, Jennifer, that this person that you hired didn't take the time to get to know crew. That's a shortcoming on their part, but you should set that expectation in a contract too, that you expect them to do a deep dive and learn the organization before they come to the session. Your session should be customized to what you need and want and where you're going to go. So I'm going to pause there. Any other questions or thoughts about consultants? And I will say, Patty Drummond, about offering this as a service. Jenny and I were just talking about this today. I don't think we'll charge a fee for it, but we're going to try to figure out a way to offer strategic planning in the future. And okay, I'm seeing two hands up. Stephanie Duncan, do you have a question or comment?
I just wanted to comment on the consultant. Similar to what LaShawn went through, we had a real transformation of the board and the chapter when we did our plan 3 years ago. And we had a 2-day session with a consultant with the board to set the strategic plan. And then after that, we had a full day session with committee chairs to do the tactics, the same facilitator. Now we've, 3 years later, we're thinking about what are we going to do next year? And we may or may not use the consultant for the board because we did such a deep dive when we did this. We're not sure we need to, it's more of an update, not a start all over.
Yeah.
But we're definitely interested in using a consultant, that one or another one, with the co-chairs again, because we think it's really important to have a facilitator at that level because they are so tied to their own committees' goals and things like that. We need to get them to think outside the box. And
absolutely.
So we think there's real value there, even if we don't do it at that level.
I love that, Stephanie, and thanks for sharing it. Is that you did 2 days and you did 1 day with the committees, just committee chairs, right?
Yep.
Yeah, you got to get that buy-in and commitment because committees can go off in directions that are not in support of the chapter or the goals of the chapter in the plan. Sarah Marsh.
Yes, hi everybody. I'm New York chapter. My feeling was actually my comment prompted by Jennifer Schumann's comment about the consultant not getting to know the nature of the organization. I think we're all kind of regional in some of our wants and needs for members. And I'm not sure somebody from the outside could really come in the time allowed and really understand the essence of each chapter and be able to address it. Also, if you have an existing strategic plan that's from, say, 9 years ago, can't we just tweak it every 3 years or so? Hiring a consultant to come in and rewrite it seems to me to be a lot of money for I'm not sure what. These are just comments. I'm new to the strategic planning game. Enjoying the one that's Crew New York has. I think it's been really well put together and a lot of really smart women are working on it. So I feel confident it will end up very well.
Yeah.
Without any professional help. I'm right, Barbara, right? There's no professional help with the strategic plan for New York?
I'm not sure I totally agree with you, Sarah.
Oh, okay. That's all right.
No, I thank you, Sarah, though. These are just your opinions and your perspective, and I think that's important to share that. And I think that every 3 years, you can use this. If you don't want to spend a lot of extra money and do a very deep dive, you might negotiate with the consultant you used the last time around where you invested a deep dive on it and ask them for a lower price to just walk you through an update. But again, if you're validating and doing environmental scanning every year, you're going to know if you need to make a bigger move in the plan than just an update. We typically don't just do an update every year, or I'm sorry, every 3 years. We actually really take that deep dive. So I think it depends on, each chapter has to assess how well their original plan was done and what works for you. But I do think that if you are hiring a consultant that you've used before and you're not going to ask for a whole day or 2 days, and you're just going to say, hey, will you join us for a 4-hour check-in on this plan? Then that might be enable you to do a lesser cost and spend less time on it. I don't, but each chapter has to determine that. So, and someone asked, what is a fair fee or amount? Does anybody else have an experience with that at the chapter level? I think LaShawn's answer is probably typical for a chapter. I will tell you that at Crew Network, we've paid 10, 12, 15, $20,000 for particular people. The person we had last knew the industry, and she had broad experience in a lot of areas that were important to us. So we paid a little more for her, and she was out of the New York market, by the way. True New Yorker. But yeah, I think at the chapter level, you can probably do something for 5K. And again, look at our own numbers, because then you have someone who does understand the business, and it doesn't take that long for them to get up to speed. Okay, Jen, do you want to go ahead? So I'm looking at the time and we're running over. So I'm going to just talk quickly about the planning session. Setting is very important. Determine whether you want to be in a retreat situation, do it in the office, or do it in someone's home. I've done all three of these, and they all have different benefits and advantages, and can work. It just depends on the culture of your chapter and what you want to do. The bottom line is that the planning session has to be conducive to the goals you want to accomplish, right? You can't be in an office where you're getting interrupted all the time. And if you're in an office with a glass, conference room where people can see you, you will probably not be focused, and it won't be as conducive. So think about that. It's crucial that everyone participating understand the desired outcomes. And that is one of the things that I think LaShawn put up in the chat, the very first thing. I mean, the very first time that the planning group, work group, whatever you call it, meets to do the strategic plan, you need to set agreed upon goals. And that's really important. So some of them I put down is, we agree as a group, we're going to come up with a 3-year vision, mission. Well, visions are usually longer. They're usually 10 years. Mission, specific goals and objectives that move the chapter closer to achieving our mission. We agreed to come up with a set of rules of engagement of how we're going to operate. And things like that are really like, who speaks when. Like at our board, we use what I call Robert's Rules Light, so that everybody gets a chance to speak, but we're not talking over each other. You can also have a parking lot where someone comes up with an idea, but it doesn't fit the conversation. You put it over. We used to have a flip chart where we put all the stuff in the parking lot. Some of you, if you're old enough like me, you've been through the flip chart. You agree as a work group that you're going to be strategic, not tactical. You agree that there's no phones in your hands or on the table. So those are some of the things you need to agree to of how you're going to work. And then the other final thing I would mention, and Jenny's going to give you these slides, but have you ever heard of the model forming, storming, norming, and performing? Has anybody ever heard of that? It's a model for how teams get to high level performance. And so I think if you're not familiar with it, I would go ahead and Google it. But when you're in a forming phase, that's when you're setting agreements of what the goals are, what the outcomes you want, and all of that, getting to know each other. I recommend, if you form a group of multiple people from different areas within the chapter to do the strategic plan, that you at the very first meeting, ask, if they've done DISC, ask them what their DISC is, or strength finders, or some kind of assessment that lets you get familiar with how they like to work. I think that's a really important understanding to have. Storming is when people are kind of beginning the process of working together, and they sort of push against the boundaries. There could be some conflict, there's a little friction because everybody has their own opinions, and all of us are very smart, talented, and opinionated, and so you'll see a little bit of jockeying and whatnot. Then once everybody starts to get to know each other better and respect and honor each other, you get to that norming part where you've resolved your differences, you respect each other, you're working together, you appreciate one another's strengths. And then finally, performing is when you see the team's working at its highest potential. And that's what you want your strategic planning group to be, working at its highest potential. Okay, Jenny, let's get to, oh, I'm so sorry, you guys, I feel bad. I did say norming, Nikki. It's forming, storming, norming, and performing. The final plan, okay, so once you've done your session, you come up with the final plan. And what I call the post-strategic plan retreat bullets that you need to go through. The consultant or volunteer, whoever's your facilitator, completes the first draft of the plan. The committee or work group that did the plan reviews it and comments, feedbacks, and approves it. Then the committee recommends it to the board and says, and the overall board has say. And the board then approves it with unified agreement. And one of the things that I think we do really well at Crew Network is that board members, we have a unified voice. When we come out of any meeting, we have a unified voice on what we're doing and where we're going. And that, I think, really helps establish everybody's buy-in and commitment to it. So I don't think, in my notes, I put, no one leaves the room without agreement. Everybody has to agree that this is the plan we're going to go with. And then the next part is building out the tactics. And I want to talk a little bit more about this, but the big thing that I want to say that I find really helpful is a strategic board decides what needs to be done. The staff or the committee leaders and committee members figure out the tactics of how it will be done. So that's, if you want to create a clear separation, it really keeps people out of the weeds. The strategic plan and those doing it and the board who approves it are coming up with what needs to be achieved. Those who are on the committee level are figuring out how to get that done. So it's the what and the how. So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to just dig into tactics. We talked a little about this. So having your committee chairs and committee members, however you choose to do that, work on the tactics with the board once it's approved, it goes a long way. And just that commitment, that buy-in, and that mutual agreement that we're moving consistently forward together. And I put an example in here because think about it. If you're on a committee, you can have a really poor committee experience and liken it to your own professional job. How do you feel when your boss comes to you and says, here's a project that you need to get done, and here's how I want you to get it done, and tells you exactly what to do? It doesn't feel good. So you want to give them the vision and the direction of where to go, but let them figure out where. And at the end of the day, the board liaison is going to be at the table with the committee, making sure it's on point. So that's, I think, the biggest thing I'd like to end with here for this slide is that at the end of the entire process, the board needs to be the advocate for the strategic plan and the direction of the chapter. And the committee members need to plan and execute the tactics. That's the ideal. Okay, one more slide and we're done. This is the big one though, communicating the plan. This is the part I think that always falls by the wayside, and it's not a good idea. Every organization I've worked in and I've always done the strategic plan because I was mostly on the communication side. This was always a big part of my job, but make sure you build into your work plan the communication piece, and then also leverage your chapter communications committee as part of the process for communicating. All of your stakeholders should be aware of the strategic plan and where you're going. Back in the day when we used a lot of print and paper, we used to print up our vision, mission, goals, and objectives and send out a copy with the board president from the board president to say, here's where our organization's going in the next 3 years. I think that in this day and age, when people get so many emails or told to go to the website, I think we've lost some of that, right? That people don't know. So, I mean, another option is sharing it at your programs. Put the strategic plan up on the screen so people can see the goals, one per slide or something like that. But make sure that all the stakeholders realize it, because that it builds the passion for the organization and it allows people to be excited about where things are going. And then if there are any, I know we're about 6 minutes over, so that's it. That's the best, most straightforward way I can tell you about strategic planning. So are there any other questions, comments, or anything you'd like to share on how you've communicated the plan? Anybody? Social media is a big part of that now too. A blog post, there's lots of different channels. Okay, well, I'm so sorry I ran over time. I actually usually have been better about tracking my time, but today I got a little long-winded. Sorry about that. Jenny will have all the documents out to you. And if you want the work plan template that I use, I'm happy to send that out, a blank one for you, and take you through that. And Jenny and I, you'll see when you get my slides that she's going to send you the slides with the note pages. So you'll actually have some of my notes as well, which will be more helpful to kind of get you through. So, all right. Yes, we want your template. Okay, Nathan, you got it. thank you all so much. Good luck with your strategic planning. And I thank you for your time and commitment to Crew.